Would you believe me if I told you that this intro has gone through 3 different revisions and I wasn't even completed with it until I finished the entire script? Wait, hold on, isn't that normally what game makers do too? Like, tutorials are usually one of the last things to get made in the game making process? Yeah, whatever. I wanted to make some kind of mixed salad joke here because this game's soundtrack has a lot of different electronic genres in it, but then I realized I don't really know what constitutes a mixed salad, and maybe I've given up on writing a proper intro. Just take the damn music. I'm really glad that despite how generic the name of this game is, they still didn't choose the path of least resistance to name one of the songs in this soundtrack Roboquest, because in my estimation, if they were going to do that, they definitely would have at least done that for this track. Since it's so good, they gave it 2 entries in the OST. Metal Hero is a fucking killer track to be used for the opening menu of the game, and having it come back during your final fight with Iris strikes the same blood-pumping energy that made you want to start a run in the first place. As are most of the songs in this soundtrack, there's a certain level of ignorance to their musical arrangements, but like in a good way. It's kinda like, for my producer peeps out there, if you show a beat you've been making to one of your homies and they give you that stank face, you know you've crafted something special. Sure, it might not have all of the level and lore implications compared to the games covered previously, but for a game of this style, I ain't asking for much. Just some knocking drums, some good-ass bass, some grit just to add a little bit of character, and a high enough tempo to keep driving the player to play for longer. This track has all of those things, although I guess given the fact that this doesn't necessarily play during any actual gameplay, it can ignore that part about keeping the player hooked for longer, and instead we'll just sub in something like should be surprisingly banging enough for a main menu theme to draw in those players. One thing you'll find very often in this game's soundtrack is that each theme loops quite a lot. You won't find nearly as much diversity in the arrangement or the musical character compared to what we've seen in the past. This is due to a variety of reasons, but I haven't even had time to show you the gameplay yet, which kind of plays a big part in how this soundtrack was designed, so we should probably get moving. This is only the second song in the soundtrack, and I'm already making bold and outlandish claims like this wouldn't be a Roboquest video without blank. But I firmly believe that we cannot talk about the Roboquest soundtrack without mentioning this little song that plays from the Robo speaker in the hub area cannot be forgotten. Its 8-bit and chiptuney nature really gives me the same vibes as playing an old-school arcade fighting game. Or I guess I should say that's what I think it's trying to resemble because I haven't really played old-school fighting games minus like the last month or so. In that case, maybe I should have just generally described arcade music in general. Either way, I love the inclusion of this guy because coupled with the established, albeit slightly nomadic placement of these points of interest, it offers a nice, very silly and laid-back experience, which offers a nice respite from the hard-charging gameplay that awaits you. But okay, now we can move on to actual gaming. Whoops, I lied. I forgot about one more track. Bet you weren't expecting the level transition theme to actually be in the OST. But what you normally hear in the first 5 seconds or so of loading into this level is really kind of what you get throughout the whole track. It's nothing too diverse, so you're not missing out on much. Funnily enough, this song still achieves the same goal of getting your energy up to push through more levels to ultimately win or die, but it has a very much different feeling to get you there. Most of this game's soundtrack contains very bass-heavy tracks with very stagnant movement to help you lock in and get shit done, but it's so high energy that it pushes you through those levels. This song just makes you happy to be on that adventure in the first place. It has the same feelings as, well, going on a journey, or a road trip with your friends. It's still high energy, and it still has those punchy electronic drums, but it's a lot more happy for once. It puts you in a good mood, and it gives you that feeling of waking up super early in the morning for something that you're excited to partake in, like a journey. A journey that will take you into another canyon, just adjacent or maybe connected with where your hub area is located. This is where you will learn roughly how to play the game, if it's your first time playing. And if it's not your first time playing, then you will learn roughly how many times you can gamble with Lottery Luke before it becomes a problem. The beginning of this song starts with a bass that sounds like it's been slightly EQ'd to remove some of the deep rumbly frequencies, which, like many millions of other song arrangements in the past, makes the introducing of those frequencies into the mix when you actually start playing the game feel that much more satisfying. The song also somehow contains elements that give off both a feeling of, yes, this is my first time here, and a feeling of,
alright, let's do this one last time.
With both the very repetitive bass notes indicating some kind of build-up in preparation for this route you have to take to ultimately defeat the final boss, and the stinger playing at the very beginning, almost sounding like it was the ending of a different song, indicating that you maybe had other things that you were doing right before you got here. When the drop hits, it feels very consistent and sporadic at the same time, where the drums and the other elements are very consistent in their rhythm, but the sequencing of the sounds themselves are very reminiscent of old, beatbox routines, where it feels more like a test to see how many elements they can fit into each 4-bar section, never minding how long those individual elements stick around for. You have 4 different bass sounds playing 3 or 4 notes each before it switches to the next one, and it feels like a song that was stitched together, rather than something that was built from the very beginning as one cohesive piece. I've also found that while almost all the songs in this game are very consistent in their rhythm and pacing, they all have 1 or 2 different things, one little piece, one little core element that might only poke out for a moment, but ends up becoming the main thing that I remember the song for. In this case, that thing is these short guitar riffs that play every 2 hits or so. And they stick out to me because it feels like a break from the heavy vibrations of everything else while still feeling like it kind of belongs there. And if you haven't seen already, I'm quite the sucker for guitar in my electronic music, even something as short as this hit. If you listen really closely, you can also hear what almost sounds like someone hitting a plastic tube with a spoon or something, which is a super subtle but nice percussion addition. Both Oasis and the song that goes along with it, Connect, continue the momentum left behind by the canyons, which, to be fair, the Oasis is essentially still in the canyons, but this song waits no time at all to get you right into the action. Immediate 4-on-the-floor drum action, immediate high-octane bass sequencing, some blaring siren effects to add some high frequencies and increase tension, and a general arrangement that does not hold back. Despite all these elements that I mentioned, the drums still punch above everything else basically all the time because of a little thing called sidechaining. And essentially, sidechaining is most commonly used to make sure that your kick punches through everything in a mix by turning down everything for just a few milliseconds to let the kick shine. This creates that sort of pulse effect that you might hear every once in a while, usually a lot more audible in the bass since those frequencies are being turned down for the kick to replace those same frequencies. Another thing this track has taught me is just how much the music of Roboquest kicks ass, specifically when you're playing the game. That's not to say the tracks aren't good outside of that context, but there's something so special about these tracks when you're also ripping and tearing through every robot in your wake. Oh yeah, and the thing that makes this track particularly sweet to me is the kick and snare playing an offset rhythm with the bass. It gives it a bit of resolution before immediately being put back into the fray of things. This is one of the many songs in the game that have me going on record saying that this soundtrack is the electronic genre mixed and/or chopped salad. You've got trap elements, drum and bass elements, dubstep elements, and now you have hardstyle, huh? I swear to God I saw on one of Noise Cream's socials that they're Russian or something, but now I don't have anything to back that up, so now I just look conspiratorial for no reason. I suppose hardstyle, or at least hardstyle adjacent music, is actually pretty fitting for a stage that both requires your utmost speed in completing the first level and a half, and expects a lot of speed out of you for the time trial that awaits you in the Rift. But unfortunately, this also results in me not really being able to hear the whole song in a context of the game, because I only have a minute or two to actually get across the finish line. A fun thing about this song to me is that despite it feeling a lot like hardstyle, after the first minute or so, the instrumentation and rhythm of those instruments sound an awful lot like that type of music you'd see in DDR, or music you'd see VTubers dancing to, or music you'd see people play in Beat Saber. It sounds light and fun and upbeat. The majority of this music in this game gives you a certain drive to keep playing and discovering what the world has to offer, and what you, the player, are capable of doing. But this specific portion of the song gives you the energy and the want to literally get up and dance. But remember, you are still on like a timed trial, so you might want to save the dancing until after you've gotten the blue crystal, and then you can play the song as many times as you want and dance to your heart's content. Oh my god, bro. The swing on this track is immaculate. Full stop. That's like the thing that makes this track. That's just the thing that makes it. Even though you'll only really be hearing the swing in full force for the first like 20 seconds of the song. The open and closed hats sounding like they were sampled straight from a jazz record, combined with this really bouncy bass that sounds like it was sampled from a rubber band? What the fuck does that even mean? Not to mention how all of this sounds when you are face to face with either a stationary turret, the Underminer himself, or a bomb that straight up ends your run if you're dumb and don't pull the lever on his back. The reason I mention the swing is also because of how off-kilter it sounds by comparison to the rest of the soundtrack. You're telling me that I went from this doom-ass soundtrack and then I fight the first boss of my run and I hear electro swing? The swing also gives the bass a feeling like it's walking on stilts occasionally. It's not really taking up a ton of space, but it just has these little sparse hits. This is most apparent at the halfway point of the song where the drums go halftime, and I think this song made me realize why halftime sounds so good to a lot of people. When you're talking about a track that has a snare on the 2 and the 4 of a bar, it feels like it has a very heavy driving force that is non-stop. But when you put the snare on the 3, it gives the track an insane amount of groove. It generally causes the song to have like a different feeling. It opens up a lot of space for creative liberties, and if you do it right, it can also deliberately drop some of the energy while still keeping people enticed because the track sounds different enough that people don't know if you're going to keep all the same elements or if you're going to change the rhythm or sound selection. Too bad this song is so dang short that you don't have much time to enjoy it, but at least the first stage boss fight is usually not very hard, so you'll end up finishing right around the time where you've heard all you need to hear. This song strikes two different feelings to me, depending on whether you beat the stage or whether you get knocked out. Either you get knocked out and the song sounds like it's telling you like, tough shit, you got beat up, get up and try again, I know you can get it this time. Or you beat the stage and the song is telling you, good job man, you beat the stage, but don't let up, you have to keep going, and it pumps you up to continue and keep going. It gives you a second to admire how well you performed in that last stage, and the slower tempo actually helps to encourage you to take a brief moment to just slow down and kind of think about what just happened. Sure, I just said that it gives you a pump of energy to keep going, but it doesn't immediately ask that you push forward into the next stage. Rather, it just helps you to build up that energy. Halfway through the track, the drums feel like they are entirely dictating what's happening melodically, with every note only triggering when a kick or a snare is playing. And in a weird way, again, shouts out the producer homies, it almost sounds like as if the first half of the song was chopped up. Like if you took the original record, and then you chose to resample it and center the groove around a differing drum pattern than the original, which would result in the instruments only playing to follow in tandem with the heavy transients of the drums. Too bad people are only looking at their stats for about 5 seconds before moving on, because they miss a lot in this song. Like, most people don't even get to hear the drums, which are very traditional and from like a regular ass acoustic drum kit, but they might also be clipping a little bit or have some kind of saturation applied to them to give them some real punch compared to other acoustic drum kit inclusions. I was going to mention this in the canyons, but every stage theme in this game repeats the beginning, low energy portion of the song during the downtime until you walk through the doors, and this stage's theme, for some reason, is just easily the most fun to edge. Maybe it's the juxtaposition of like the slap bass and the low fidelity drums with the incredibly punchy drums and the bass synth combo that takes up like 90% of frequencies. Maybe it's the satisfaction of actually walking out the door when the drop is supposed to happen, as opposed to the drop just kind of happening when you walk out the door. Maybe it's the fact that I could only get to the fields within my first like 10 hours of gaming, so I'm much more in tune with what this song is doing, but this might be one of the best stage themes in the whole game. And there's a reason why most content creators are using this song if they're trying to showcase the music of the game. The gradual opening of the filter at the beginning is such a simple way to add a ton of energy before the drop even occurs. The fact that a ton of the weapons in this game seem to be able to fire in tandem with this very consistent beat, this is basically a fucking rhythm game sometimes, but you don't actually run the risk of failing if you missed a shot. Well, okay, you do, but like not in the same way. The bass also has a ton of syncopation, and sometimes you'll hear the slap bass and the fuzzy bass playing at the same time in the pockets of silence left by the other, and that just generally creates a lot of interesting rhythms that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily hear in music of this genre. As you've already seen a handful of times, you'll also still see these little musical ornaments placed around in the track to give it a little bit more character so that it's not just music for bass heads. Bro, why does Cyber War have to be such a bitching track with some really cool orchestral drums at the beginning to set a mood reserved only for cinematic masterpieces, only to be put on a level as tilting as the fucking Doom Gardens? Maybe I'm just bad at the game, but I could only get to the fields within my first like 10 hours of gaming. But I feel like I get skill diffed every time I come to this stage. Or I lose like 75% of my health because I literally don't have any patience for the suicide bomb bots and I just end up brute forcing my way through. I can still very much tell that certain song titles were based off of the feeling of the song in question, since they're infinitely less complex in their naming conventions, so it sounds like I'm just trying to stretch out the time of the video here, but the elements that make up this song sound like, you know, if you had to mix electronic music with music that would play in Narnia, which makes for like a really interesting, cool soundscape, but I don't exactly know why the song was chosen to be put on a stage as short as this one. I get that sort of epic battle vibe of the song probably adds enough tension to the stage as is, where you kind of have to like skirt around a bunch of explosions the whole time. And after I learned my lesson with Risk of Rain 2, I don't even really know if this song was made in light of this level, if the level was made in light of this song, or if the two songs were made completely separately, entirely ignorant to the other's existence. But hey, you know what? It still sounds really damn good. It sounds uplifting, it makes you feel a little bit tense knowing that one misstep could cause you to have to restart. You know, the tough thing about this soundtrack is the fact that there's only so much I can really use in terms of like words to explain what's actually happening, and there's only so much that I can actually do in terms of explaining like what does this have to do with X, Y, and Z. And so like some of these songs I have like a paragraph written, and that paragraph took me like a fucking week to write, it seems, because it's just difficult to write sometimes. But now that I've thought about it, that's what makes this music great, honestly, is the fact that a lot of it just speaks for itself. I don't have to do a lot, because this soundtrack kind of speaks for itself. After all of this has been said and done, we just get this really nice, juicy halftime section. The heavily reverbed synths at the beginning of this song kind of sound like you're walking through a long-ass tunnel, and you're not exactly sure what you'll be met with at the end of it. But also, you've probably played enough of this game to know exactly what's at the end of it. It's more of these same fucking robots you've been dealing with thus far. This isn't exactly to speak to the use of long-ass intros to build up some kind of atmosphere, because if that were the case, the intros would feel a bit more like they match with the aesthetic or the feel of the areas that the songs play in, and that's not really the case here. That also isn't to say that these sound bad by any means. There are just moments where it feels like they might have spent a little bit too much time trying to be ambient and trying to build up energy, given the fact that within the context of the game, you're absolutely not sitting in this spawn room for over 40 seconds. When the drop comes in, we have a classic drum and bass pattern, and we have like the 4 basses that are used to make up the majority of the soundscape of this song. Or maybe like 3 basses and 1 synth that sweeps and kind of glides like it's a dubstep bass. So we'll kind of say that it just functions like a 4th bass. I will speak to the fact that the basses themselves take up a lot of mid-frequencies, so it not only feels very balanced and surprisingly not muddy, but it also sounds quite crispy at times and very bright, since a lot of these basses are also sliding up to higher frequencies. Really, the most consistent low end that we have here is the kick and this 8th note bass that is not doing all the crazy weeps and whoops of the other sounds. After a little bit more of this high energy drum and bass music we've been given, the track takes another break to move into a halftime drum pattern, almost akin to that of like a generic hip hop or trap beat. Two-step hi-hats, snare on the 3 and the 7, and kicks placed on the 1 and then again on the 6. Really, the only thing that you're missing is the offset snare pattern. After watching this same video 3 times, 4 times actually, of this dude making fucking Minecraft music of all things, I've begun to appreciate the use of like musical or white noise sweeps in my music. This isn't my music, just music in general. I like them because they almost sound like the music is blowing past you in the wind, and it just sounds really cool. It might be a bit barren right now with just those sweeps, but maybe that's exactly the point. The first minute of this song don't even need no damn snare. It's got enough high frequencies as it is, with all the white noise infused synths, as well as the higher octave synth playing something almost akin to like a riser of sorts, already trying to build up more energy even though we've only had 30 seconds to take in the massive increasing of energy from the drop. Dude, that silent hit on the drop is also a really effective tool in making a drop both unexpected and, as a result, hit even harder. Having all this energy be built up, you'd think that you can't get any more energy than that. And while you are totally correct, you can at least artificially increase the energy by just taking all of it away, even for a brief moment, causing the listener to skip a beat in their groove, stop, and ask themselves, what the hell was that? But not wasting any more time on it so that people can get right back into the kick-ass, well, everything else. I also really love that brief vibe switch from synthy sequenced bass to this really smooth bass that glides into different notes just to drop back into the fray of things. This song conveys another thing that the soundtrack does really well, where it puts most of its best foot forward for a couple of bars, then does really brief shifts into using other elements that aren't heard anywhere else in the song, which makes you have to stop and reanalyze what you were just listening to. But you have to deliberately pause to do that, otherwise you'll be immediately overtaken by the thing that the song was doing the whole time. The last really important thing to comment on here is this really simple gliding synth, which doesn't really do a whole lot on its own, but it's also not really taking anything away from the other sweet parts of this song, and it's a fun way to add variety, so I'm not going to complain about it. This song easily feels like one of the most different from the rest of the soundtrack, mostly due to this bouncy synth following a funk rhythm, which I think speaks to one of the strongest aspects this soundtrack has going for it: rhythmic intricacies. I don't necessarily mean that the rhythms in this game are complex, but more so that the different rhythms help to create a different feeling than just the breakneck pacing that you'd come to expect from a fast-paced shooter like this. The first minute of this song is actually an example of the elements all following the same note length, leaving these fairly large gaps in the music, a lot of syncopation, and the combination of those two things really creates an aggressive bounce. Some brilliant composer once said something to the effect of like, rhythm isn't always about the notes that are playing, but more the gaps in between them, and this opening is kind of the epitome of that idea. But of course, right after all this rhythm and bounce I was talking about, we get that classic sequenced bass rhythm which helps to fill out most of those gaps and create the soundscape that we're all familiar with at this point. There's also a few fun percussion ornaments that are really subtle in the heat of blowing everything up, like this tambourine fill and this really subtle hissing sort of sound. As we approach the last 45 seconds or so, we incorporate even more of the classic sorts of octave jumps and slides. I'll fully admit that I hadn't listened to the full song in depth and was willing to write this off as a bit of a filler piece, but if you're fine with the slightly club-sounding vibe of the beginning, your patience will be well rewarded. I really wish I had a certain somebody here to do some half-decent Duke Nukem impression for an opening bit to this song.
I'm here to kick ass and 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 kick ass.
Random thing that I just noticed, I've realized music like this, it goes so ignorantly dummy hard because a lot of them start with a much more kind of rinky-dink sounding instrument, so you at least just get an idea of the rhythm or the vibe, and then before you know it, you're playing the same pattern on a fucking chunky guitar or a bass or whatever, and it's so good. I also can hear these fairly quiet high synth notes in the background that, with their glidey nature and shifting only between like 2 or 3 notes, it kind of gives me Siren vibes. Not for any particularly important reason, that's just kind of the tone they give off. Then the song strips itself down just a little bit to this heavily processed guitar to remind you what musically is actually going on and just giving the guitar a little bit of time to itself. Not like it's really doing a whole lot that you haven't already heard, but we'll take it anyways. I think the distorted nature of a lot of electric guitars, as well as the distorted nature of a lot of synths used in this style of music, combined together, they distort in a way that makes the music really loud and in your face, but it makes your ears tingle in a way that I can't really explain. Okay, so what previous me was talking about is something called resonance, and that doesn't necessarily apply to what's actually happening here, but it's more that, like, certain tones will combine and they will literally ring out harsher than others, but like, I don't really mean harsh in a negative way, more just they are more present into the forefront. So the best way to think about it is when people talk and they have like an S in some of their words, it's going to whistle a lot and it's going to resonate a lot more and it's kind of piercing. If you take that and apply it to frequencies that are not super duper high, then you're going to end up with this kind of like stuff being pushed to the forefront and it sounds really nice. and then they just say fuck it and tune down the guitar to almost make it feel like djent music. Except djent music doesn't usually have this fast-paced of a rhythm, I think. And maybe I've just incorrectly attributed low-tuned guitars to djent without really thinking of any of its other complexities. Look, I don't know anything about the interconnected world of this game. I don't know if the energy center is a main place that powers all the other places we go to in this game, but what I do know, or at least kind of what I believe, is that the opening to this song kind of sounds like the energy center itself is failing. The gritty synth almost sounding atonal, and the accent synth in the background sounding a lot like an alarm. I will admit that I don't normally get that feeling when I'm playing this level, but what are these videos if not just me bullshitting my way through song analysis after song analysis and still somehow convincing people that they hear the same thing? This drop absolutely hits, and maybe it's because I've retroactively tied this song's whole existence with a failing power plant, but as soon as the drop happens, the vibe completely switches despite the core musical motif being the same, obviously due to sound selection and general intensity levels, and it just sounds like you as the player not really giving a shit if the energy center goes down because you still have a mission to do. I think in general, a lot of what makes this music stand out is the fact that there are a lot of peaks and valleys, sometimes for only a brief moment, sometimes for 40 seconds. Super low energy sections where the music is kind of just idly existing around you to super high energy sections that feel like they are being shaped by your actions within the game. One of the greatest examples of this in my mind is this song's use of just turning off every instrument and using a simple 16th note kick pattern as a drum fill to transition to a slower halftime-ish section with pared down drums and a lot less of those high energy synths. Sure, not every song makes it as blatant as that, but almost every song in the game at least starts low energy, and there are usually a handful of little checkpoints in the level that you can use to heal and upgrade, and during those sections, the low energy music comes back, and maybe that's another reason why this music feels like it excels in the context of the game, is because they can compose and build out a full energy composition if they wanted to, but within the game there are still natural breaks that can supplement that so you don't feel exhausted after finishing a few stages. I've spent a fair amount of time talking about how the calm, low-energy beginnings to a lot of these songs introduce an important motif that you'll find throughout the rest of the song. It also typically introduces to you to what you think the rhythm will be. In this case, it's actually pretty cool because the kick pattern is really sporadic and chaotic, has nothing to do with the kick pattern when the drop happens, and it's about the only super important thing happening for the majority of the intro. Sure, you have a guitar strumming sweep every now and then, you have a fairly quiet synth in the background just so that there's actually something melodic going on, you have really fast 16th note hi-hats being played, and the inclusion of a subtle open hat playing the same rhythm before... a rhythm that sounds like it came straight out of the Rat battlefield. The Rattlefield, if you will. This was an absolutely really stupid reference to Health's album Rat Wars. I can't play it because copyright, but go listen to it and you'll know what I mean. With maybe the punchiest snare I've heard so far. I don't really know why I'm focusing so hard on the snare right now. The song waits no time at all before moving into a halftime rhythm, and the bass sounds like it has a stronger transient now. It feels punchier and less like it's sliding all over the place, and it gives an interesting grittiness. The almost staccato nature of the bass makes it feel a lot cleaner and less like it's just noise. I also quite enjoy the fact that the bass in this specific application sounds like it both covers the earphone shaking low rumble as well as sliding all the way up a few octaves. I know it's not actually doing all that sliding, and it's just another synth that kind of sounds like it, but it just covers a great big spectrum, and I really like that. I think that the song for Catercoaster is easily one of the best boss themes, but again, unfortunately, Catercoaster just kind of falls apart faster than every other boss in the game, so I can only really hear like the first minute, but luckily for me, that first minute just kicks major ass. This plucky kalimba at the beginning sounds like adventurous optimism in a way of like, oh wow, look at this civilization that crumbled to pieces and is now infested with robots. I kind of want to explore this. It also kind of sounds like music that would play when a detective in some kind of anime has to investigate a crime scene, albeit a bit faster. I don't really have a ton to say on this because the first little bit of this song is about as standard as it gets when it comes to music of this genre, so I'm just gonna let this ride out for a minute. The main thing that makes this song stand out to me is this slowly ascending synth until it eventually lands at the target note, because it's both acting as a riser and as a tension builder, because you never quite know when it's going to stop ascending. After that, we find the main motif back with the bass and the kick, which is a little fun callback, and only moments later the bass itself is also doing a little bit of ascending itself, helping the song feel a little bit less stagnant for just a moment. I don't really want the word stagnant being used in a bad light here because it's really only the bass and the drums that feel stagnant, but the synth and the plucky kalimba sound a bit more intricate in their rhythms, and they help the song feel more complex. Ultimately, this song still hits hard, it just isn't too complex in the grand scheme of things. Luckily, the secret level, on the other hand, the sidechain is really strong with this one. There's something weirdly dark feeling about this song, and I think it has something to do with the soundscape more than the musical content. The long drawn-out brass notes definitely give a kind of looming feeling, but it also could just be like the literally dark environment. I also think it could have something to do with the fact that you hear this song in a secret level that you have to kind of go out of your way to actually find. Man, I don't think I've mentioned how much I really like when songs drop on the snare instead of the kick. It's kind of just one of those things where casual ambient listeners of the album will expect a drop where it's normally supposed to be, the kick will hit, the drop won't happen, the listener will be very confused as to what happened, but before they have time to even consciously think that, the drop will have already happened and they have to ask themselves again, what the hell was that? I also don't think I've put enough emphasis on how cool the songs that use a standard 4-on-the-floor kick pattern sound when they choose to deviate from that pattern, even if only for like one measure. I think what makes this whole soundtrack's application of that technique so cool is that they structure the whole phrasing of the song around like one drum pattern, so any deviations from that pattern happen for such a short stretch of time, and most of the time you don't even get enough time to be bored or tired with those changes because of how short they happen. I love what happens during the halfway portion of the song because the downbeat is always on 1, but the musical meat doesn't hit until 2 or sometimes 3, so it really gives an offset feeling that adds a lot of interesting groove. I think the only gripe I have with this song, as well as the majority of the songs in this game, is that they kind of end super abruptly. So on top of a lot of them not being super long, I also don't have time to wind down from my high-octane analysis. I sort of just say something I like about a certain element at like the 2-minute mark of the song, and before I can even finish that thought, the song is just kind of over. The tense nature of the opening of this song makes me think that it would be pretty fitting for one of those speed levels, or... I really like the ascending notes of the harsh synth. Almost like the composer was just kind of tapping random notes up on a keyboard or something, and it ended up sticking. You know, some of our best moments are probably accidents. Boy, I do love me some kick drums playing so fast that I almost can't distinguish their rhythmic subdivisions, but I can feel them. There's also something so weirdly beautiful about this song. I don't really think there was a lot of effort put into making a soundtrack that would make the player feel anything other than blood pumping to all parts of their body. Yes, I do mean all. But I think this strange sense of beauty is actually coming from the fact that the first half of this is not as much of a bass head track as almost all the other ones. This song feels a lot more well-balanced than the other ones, and even though the melodies and drones aren't really anything too complex, it's the fact that those are actually the main focus for a while. But once you get down to brass tacks, this is still mostly dubstep electronic-influenced music, so while they still have these more melodically complex pieces at the very beginning, that thing that drives the player to keep going, those heavy bass rhythms, those heavy drum rhythms, kind of overtake a lot of those melodic complexities. That's not to say they overshadow them, but, you know, they put them in the background, and then they have this bass shit going crazy again, and it's like, alright, remember what you're here for. Remember, you gotta keep fucking going. This failing appliance screech sound sounds pretty fucking cool, and acts as a way to transition into more of that bass head feeling that we've been working with the whole time, and continues the train of feeling hyper-energetic, despite not being one of those speedrun levels. The pumping effect of the kick drum and the slow fade out of the bass and white noise downer give me the vibes of driving down the road at night and being absolutely sped by some dude in a fancy car or on a motorcycle. You're just trying to get home after like a long night and they seem like they're having a great fucking time right now. I could either go with that or I could go with something a bit more stagnant, like a generic sort of house set at a club. From a mostly calm set that feels like being passed by a guy on a motorcycle to being that guy on a motorcycle speeding past everyone on the highway. Except in this case, the motorcycle is a big fucking robot, and the car you're passing is actually just a bunch of little robots. You're speeding your way through this stage trying to clear everything out of your way in as efficient a manner as possible. You've got 3 puzzle rooms to clear. This'll be a breeze. This song feels aggressive, but confident. It feels like it's threatening you, but also makes you feel like a badass who can handle it. I think the synth riff is actually what's giving me all these weird feelings that I haven't been able to attribute to any other songs. The drums are still as punchy and electronic as ever, the bass it's still doing its classic thing, but this synth riff is giving me really strong synthwave vibes. And that point was made no more clear to me than at the beginning of it actually. The bass, while doing, as I said, its classic thing. The fact that it's actually moving up octaves makes it feel like a drifting synthwave song rather than just a normal synthwave song. The higher tempo is also aiding to feel like that, but it just has more drive and power rather than one that just sort of idly sits by. Where the horns at the beginning gave you that kind of vibe of something sort of whizzing past you at supersonic speeds, the horns at this point kind of add that additional bit of looming threat that we've seen in previous songs, which feels fairly appropriate given the fact that the looming threat is like 3 stages away or so it kind of adds that tension, adds that kind of tense feeling. Sounds a little bit like an alarm, like an intruder alert of sorts. Damn, who put DJ Mosquito on the beat? The spacey, drawn-out synth stabs almost sound like they're being played in an empty room, kind of like what you would have heard or seen in the Energy Center, which is definitely an interesting soundscape to hear in general, even if it might not necessarily quite match up with the actual environment that you're playing in. In my traditional, exacerbated extrapolation habits, you'd probably expect me to say something to the effect of the characteristics of the synth sounding like an annoying-ass mosquito that just will not leave you alone in a hot summer day while your skin is a little bit sweaty, and yeah, you'd be right. Then the song transitions from this really big, spacious thing to a very cut-and-dry arrangement. Very strong transients on the drums and the bass, with a small reverb automation tuned up to the max at the end of every 2 bars or so. Weirdly enough, this vocal sample that's playing every other bar gives me heavy cymatics sample vibes. Yes, I know most of you don't know who cymatics are, but the reason I point them out specifically is just because they really like adding in these very repetitive and nondescript vocal chops to their samples, and my sense memory transported me back to sifting through one of the many free and paid sample packs from them. And while music production is by no means a niche space, I think it's safe to say that most Roboquest players will never really have that same sense memory, so it's just a funny thing to think about. This song is also giving me the same sorts of vibes as Act, as in using a bunch of bite-sized pieces of different samples and sounds to create some kind of Frankenstein's EDM track, with this maybe being the most dubstep inspired so far, and maybe dubstep just does that. I don't actually know. It even includes these weird glitchy pieces that sound like a coffee machine failing, or a hard drive exploding, or a cooling unit exploding, or a computer exploding. Look, maybe it's because there's only like 3 stages left before the big baddie fight, but the opening rapid white noise and the gliding synth gives me really strong marathon or sprint vibes, like the music or the noises that you would hear in the rally as you're walking up to the starting line at your big foot race event, doing your stretches, jumping around, hyping yourself up, getting your blood pumping, all that kind of stuff. This point seems to be further proven by these ceremonial-ish sounding horns at the beginning. This is definitely the marathon of the Roboquest levels. Now I just have to figure out where the 100-meter sprint is. If I said that the beginning of this song sounds like preparing for a marathonic event, the drop sounds like the gunshot being fired off to signal you to get moving. You walk through the door like any other regular level, you do a little bit of killing, and then you look around you to see just how much you have to actually explore before you can get the hell out of this level. I appreciate the fact that the bass is basically the primary melodic instrument for a good chunk of this song, and the fact that they treat it almost entirely like one. Sure, it's still following the good old root notes, but the accents still feel really satisfying in this song. The heavily side-chained synth lead and choir at the top do a good job at adding a bit of optimistic flavor on top of the aggressive, ignorant bass, and it creates a nice balance of feelings. The lead and the choir sounding particularly helpful, and then the bass comes right back in and slaps you in the face with its knocking nature. The filter sweep addition to the bass riff we're already used to gives a little bit of that dubstep energy, which I'm starting to notice more and more after I saw one wiki article describe most of this music as dubstep music. The horns blaring in the background scream "Intruder Alert." the synth arpeggios fading out, sounding like they're being played from a city that was once great and is now lost. The land around you literally corrupting in front of your eyes. We're also starting to see a lot more slow and steady filter sweeps on the bass, which almost feels like some creature of the night creeping up on you, trying to be as subtle as possible so you don't notice it watching your every move. This song was actually one of the main reasons I even wanted to talk about this soundtrack in the first place. I don't really know how to describe it, but given how powerful I am by this stage of the game, I usually try to speedrun through District 13, and this song gives me an unprecedented amount of energy to do so. Maybe it's that synth blaring like I'm actually being tailed by something. Maybe it's the very consistent drum and bass pattern that keeps my head bobbing without distracting me too much from what's actually happening in the game. Maybe it's this dirty fucking switch up that gives me a spike of energy to rip and tear through every last robot in my way. That switch up alleviating some of that brooding feeling of being, well, pursued, taking away some of the power from the unknown and giving that power back to you, the player. If Haven City was supposed to be the marathon, then District 13 is definitely your final sprint. Alright, you've made your way through canyons, power plants, and green sludge. You've conquered worms, bugs, and bombs. You've traveled through potentially once sprawling cities and seen them corrupt in real time. You are in the final stretch before the final stretch, and the only thing standing between you and interstellar travel in a makeshift minivan is whatever's behind this door. This could be the biggest challenge yet, or it could just be another, weird pop culture reference. We haven't even hit the moon yet, so there's no use in trying to let me reflect on the choices that I've made along the way. Just give me another big-ass robot to smash into a million pieces, and give me a song that lets me feel good enough to do that. There is nothing particularly melodic about the drop to this song. I wouldn't really call it atonal by any means, but there isn't really a strong melody line to stick to. There are certainly leads that stick out, but those feel more like accent pieces, and even the guitar itself doesn't feel like the melodic anchor. It's kind of just like the texture. It's the grit and it's the dirt. Now we're getting into a little bit more of that electronic feel in the bass, with its weird little glides. We're also including that droning thing in the middle that kind of sounds like the droning choir in Connect. The rapid rhythm of the guitar mixed with the high tempo in the sidechain and kick gives an incredibly disorienting feel that makes me feel like I'm having a stroke. Oh hey, it's also been a minute since I've pointed out another halftime section in one of these songs, and that's really all you'll be hearing from me regarding that for just a moment. Yo, dude, is that like a quarter time section? Is that even a real thing? This almost feels like the electronic equivalent of a breakdown in a hardcore song or something, except I don't see anybody moshing to this, not yet. Also, shouts out to Noise Cream. They actually just hit like 70,000 followers, monthly listeners actually, at the time of this recording, so I'm glad to see that they're getting a lot of the recognition that they deserve. I love the amount of reverb and delay being put on these synth plucks, because it not only sounds like it's being played on a speaker in a big, wide open space, but also because the amount of white noise present in those synth plucks gives a lot of interesting texture for an opening to a song. is one of the few times where the music feels way happier and way more hopeful than normal, which I guess makes sense because I'm sure within a certain lore subsect of this game, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a... Well, that's not the right thing. If you can make it to the moon, nothing can stop you, except for maybe one of your first attempts if you don't have any crystals. This place will fuck you up. We're back with the drum and bass inspired patterns, with some occasional turns into the 4 on the floor drum kick pattern, or I guess the 2 on the floor pattern, technically? Whatever. The bass is still one of the only things in this song that vaguely sounds like it's not trying to be happy and uplifting, but even then it's still bouncing all over the place and is generally having a pretty fun time, I'd say. There's still a little bit of tension present in this track, which is fair since it's still very plausible that you as the player will die here, and pretty likely if you're as bad as I am at the game, get to the field. This synth lead is actually the thing that maybe feels the most hopeful and uplifting in the whole track, along with these choir notes just aiding in that happy-ish motif. Maybe the weirdest thing to come out of this song is the fact that it feels like the tempo is slowly ramping up throughout, and that point was made infinitely more obvious feeling after like the 3-minute mark. Maybe it's time dilation, maybe it's the anxiety of finally making it to Iris, maybe it's Maybelline. These 45 seconds of build-up feel really tense. Not only because in the OST iteration, you don't quite know when the drop is going to hit since it's very static the whole time, but within the context of the game, you have one more opportunity to level up. Maybe switch out your weapons if you're feeling ballsy, witness the most tragic death in this game's universe, and take in just how massive of a space you've been traversing on just the moon alone, never minding everything else you've had to travel through. This ping-ponging pluck being one of the only things to actually accommodate you for a little bit, the bass makes its very gradual entrance with this classic filter sweep I was talking about earlier. The game tricks you into thinking that's where the drop occurs, but remember what I just said, it hasn't been a full 45 seconds yet. Part of what makes the boss tracks hit so hard in this game is when the drop is paired with the bosses showing themselves in full effect as you walk through the door, and Iris' theme may be the best example of that. The soundtrack doesn't bother with any of that instrumentation bullshit. You're getting very arpeggiated guitar and bass hits just to feel the full force of this big... I don't really know what her shape is supposed to be. When the horns come in, it gives classic Trap City vibes for a little bit, but they don't stay on that for too long before hitting with the full force of the gritty guitar again. Another thing we've come to expect from this soundtrack is a thing that I've already talked about in the past, which is giving a looming feeling, a looming threat of like, behold the power of this great big fucking thing, but also instilling some level of confidence and power within you, so it's both somehow trying to threaten you with the scale and the scope of the enemy that you're fighting, but also saying, yeah, who gives a shit how big this thing is, you can probably still fucking destroy it. That sweep into the snare for the second drop absolutely hits too, and combined with the brief silence beforehand, leading straight back into the fray of things with some actual movement on the bass, gives it a slightly different feel than the overwhelming nature of Iris' mere existence. The swing on the 16th notes in the latter half of the drop also helps to create a different energy. Granted, it's not really swing, since swing would dictate that there be some level of human feeling input into the groove, but the rhythm is still technically there, just without the imperfection of a human player. So I guess I'd more call it like offset 16th notes. Sure, we'll go with that. And look at that! Iris is one of maybe 2 or 3 bosses in this game where the boss fight can actually reasonably last longer than their boss theme, so you actually get to hear the full thing, and maybe even a little bit more sometimes. wait a minute, why does that music sound familiar? Yeah, right, fuck all that buildup. We know what you came here for. You know what you came here for. And if there's anything that you needed to take on the second phase of Iris, it's the same song that got you on this game in the first place. Sure, it might be considered blatantly lazy, but when was the last time you heard an ending track use the opening motif? Or I guess in this case, almost the exact same song, but maybe modified a little bit. Everything I said that was great about Metal Hero at the beginning of this video still applies to this song in spades. Maybe even more so, because you actually have something going on in the game that helps to drive all of the feelings described previously, and not just something going on, but the most pivotal and important moment happening in the game. Iris wants to come back with a vengeance and regain a second wind? Fuck it, so will I, but I actually have this badass music playing in my ear, and you probably have nothing playing because you're a stupid robot who isn't being controlled by a human player. And if you are being controlled by a human player, my god, that guy sucks. I'll fully admit that I haven't quite come around to all of the things that make this song different from Metal Hero, but literally just the context alone of this being in the final boss fight makes it a whole lot more hype. I could almost be tricked into thinking that these are two different songs when they aren't, just by association of where they play, but I'm also a professional and can spot at least one key difference, so I will not be falling for your intentional spreading of misinformation today. This is fun, because I literally don't have any context behind this song or the next two. Fun fact, I couldn't even find where these belong, and I'm not even convinced that they're in the game yet. That said, I really love this ambient start. Like, nominally more than any of the other ambient starts we've seen so far. It gives off nighttime vibes, but nighttime vibes in, like, Midnight City. I don't even know if that's a real place. But, like, nighttime in a city that never sleeps. Like Cyberpunk, almost. I think the bass having its volume automated in this song sounds particularly good. It's very ambient and it has presence, but it's not too overpowering. All the effects put over the bass and the other instruments act as like a great transition into the very punchy, cut and dry, clean arrangement. From the bass that is both gritty at the low end and very clean at the high end, to the drums that are incredibly saturated and in your face, everything feels tactile here, like a food with a nice mouthfeel. Mochi? Maybe a nice sausage? The horns and maybe choir are back, but this time the reverb is automated, so they have a little bit of a lead-in before their strong impact. I know that a lot of the value of music to people is how it feels to them, and that's usually on an emotional level, but I swear I can literally feel every hit in this song. Like, I could wake up tomorrow morning and actually have bruises on my ear from how hard the bass and the kick are, and now that I think about it, I might just have my headphones on too tight. I love this whole breakdown section where it's just a kick and a really round, fuzzy bass. It feels very whole and like one cohesive body, which I'm told is kind of the point of music, but it just sounds really nice because it's a small break from the punchy and rhythmic A part we've been working with this whole time, and man, this synth bass fill thing really takes me back to like the mid-2010s dubstep and EDM scene. In maybe one of the most deep-cut references that you'll get from me maybe ever, the first 30 seconds or so kind of sound like the beginning of like a beatbox loop station performance where they're setting up some basic sounds to ultimately mangle the hell out of them. The kick being played is very reasonably something that a beatboxer could pull off, although I will admit that it's a little bit soft. The other thing that kind of clues me into that sort of feeling is this weird high-end droning noise that almost sounds like a falsetto voice being played on loop. Alright, this drop is pretty sweet and all, but this synth really sounds like it's sloshing everywhere right now. I wouldn't really call it like wet in the same way that I called the bass wet in that one video, but there's something kind of squirrely going on with the synth that makes me feel really weird. The only other thing really worth bringing up is that at the halfway mark, the same low energy arrangement is back, but this time the snare is very airy, and it almost sounds like a metronome in place of an actual snare. But other than that, this song really is one of the most like background E and same E. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I can't really imagine this being quite as nice in the context of a game compared to any other song. Sector as a song feels a bit like a mashup between a stage theme and a boss theme. It's got that same sort of airy ambience of something like Data, it's got a high-pass filtered set of drums to give you a good idea of what kind of rhythm you can expect in the next few seconds, and it's got a droning bass to fit with the more low-key nature that you'd expect from a stage theme. But then the drop is super loud and it's super in your face, almost like it would be paired with the introduction of a new boss that you hadn't yet seen. And since I would assume that this would naturally play when you walk through the door, it's not doing its regular stage theme thing of trying to build up some kind of motif or build up some kind of curiosity as to what the chorus might be, because the drop and the chorus are, they're just right there. This point is even further proven by this erratically fast kick and bass pattern that, again, with the sidechaining, makes me feel like I'm having a stroke. This portion also includes horns and choir kind of skating around the root note, and this general arrangement is just not something that you see yourself experiencing while you're in the middle of a stage. This makes me feel heavily that this is more of a boss fight theme more than anything else, but again, where boss? Man, this soundtrack it's a weird one. It's easily one of the best soundtracks that can be offered by a game in this genre. It's easily one of the better soundtracks in the indie game space, and yet for some reason this was infinitely harder for me to write about than the last two soundtracks I've talked about. I know a fair amount about the objective parts of music, what instruments are used, what drum patterns are utilized, even what techniques might be used to give a particular element its character, but for some reason that almost didn't feel like enough at times to get me through each song and give it the recognition it deserves. I will tell you that this soundtrack helped me learn a couple of things. It helped me learn that I have a long way to go before I can properly explain music to a person who knows nothing about it. Many people have told me that I've done a great job at helping them contextualize a piece, help them understand how it was made, and sometimes help them put their feelings into words. And while I'm glad that I could be given that opportunity to use my semi-expertise to explain the ins and outs of music, I think my knowledge on the technical aspects only help as a supporting pillar for other methods I use to put the music into words. And as good as I can be at explaining the technicalities and the techniques and the parts that everyone can hear, I think I'm actually just a lot better at pulling feeling statements out of my ass and using strong words and language to convince others of that feeling. As much as I can clue into what's being done to accomplish this and how they mangled the hell out of that square wave to make a synth lead, it's only one part that aids in what I think I might even be better at, which is like storytelling and generally being dramatic. But I can't do that for this soundtrack when the music is made to just kick ass while you slay some nondescript robots. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this approach, and trying to put more meaning behind it would probably just dilute what makes it good. Trying to include some kind of lore implication to something like Stealth Strike wouldn't accomplish anything when the lore of the entire game doesn't even go that deep. You get like 2 splash cutscenes to explain the lore because that's all you need. This music is ignorantly good and unabashedly in your face because you don't need to mess up a good thing. You don't need the composer thinking about including a motif from one song in another because they may or may not be related. Did Noise Cream think it sounded good? Good. Put it in the game. Hell yeah. To quote Dumpster Man, fellow Roboquest enjoyer, he says, "I actually think the music is really extremely and consistently effective within the scope of what it's trying to do. And I think that's a really cool achievement for the music of a roguelike. It doesn't have the emotional depth of something like Ultra Kill or Dark Souls OSTs where you could dissect each and every note to find some deeper meaning, nor the technical wow factor of something like Risk of Rain. I'd probably focus on how consistently the music suits both the gameplay, vibe, and specific areas of the game. Of course, I'd also have to mention how little stings like the level end music also add to the feeling and flow of progression as well. Like, you definitely got me thinking more about the music of this game, and I think the conclusion I'd come to is that it just sounds good and fits the game, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that it doesn't strive for anything deeper than that, because it's just really good at that one thing. And that's just it. Roboquest's music just bangs. Heaven Piercer's core competency for Ultra Kill is making music that both makes you feel like a badass and clues you into some of the deeper lore of the game, trying to understand what purpose you serve in the deepest pits of hell. Chris Christodoulou's core competencies for the Risk of Rain series is that he's a phenomenal composer who actually went to school to learn music. He makes music that is thought-compelling, has its moments of being headbangable, but can also trick almost anyone into thinking that it's not video game music when you hear Noise Cream's core competency for Roboquest is to make music that pushes the player forward to keep slaying robots, to not be let down when they inevitably fail, to not let up the energy until the game decides to pull it back, and to make music that is at its best when you are doing all of those things. It's best when it's paired with the decimation of everything in your path. It's best when you find a sweet-ass combo of upgrades and abilities to use on your favorite character. It's best when you accidentally treat it like a rhythm game sometimes. And it's best when you don't think that hard about it. So why did I think so hard about it? Well, I mean, that's like my whole job. All in all, if you don't need a soundtrack to make you wonder why you exist in the world, if you don't need a soundtrack to make you question whether or not robots have free will, Roboquest should be your next game. I'm of course going to tell you to go buy it, because it's really sweeping the indie game genre right now, and it should continue to do that. But I'm also just the music guy, so like, go listen to the music. Even if you don't have the money to buy the game, like, YouTube's free, dude. Just like, go.